welcome to the Cineworld show, where we go through all the latest releases at Cineworld cinemas and go through the latest news and reviews from the world of Hollywood. Here's what's coming up on today's show.
We're talking about the newest releases coming your way in Cineworld cinemas, including the musical extravaganza Break the Silence, the movie, and those bodacious dudes Bill and Ted Get Old and Face the Music.
We'll be looking at the history of New Mutants and how it got to Cineworld screens this week.
And we'll be reviewing the New Mutants in full, both spoiler-free and spoiler-filled.
So a couple of releases to talk about first before we get into our New Mutants review later in the show. Laurie, we've got Break the Silence, the movie, which is out Thursday, the 10th of September and the 12th of September only. So there's a very limited time to go and see this movie. Are you a BTS fan by any chance?
Not particularly. I've seen them do Carpool Karaoke with James Corden and felt particularly won over. I've seen the good work the K-pop stans have been doing on Twitter, especially. Yeah, so I think this is one of those things, like, you already know if you want to go see it, right? Like you're either in BTS land or you're not. But I imagine, like, this, if you haven't heard of them, this is one of the biggest bands in the world. Like, they are surprisingly massive. Is what I found, and yeah, this is actually quite a massive deal. This is coming to cinemas, really, because this is one of those, like, it's like a behind the scenes documentary with the guys, and, like, you know, I think things like this, typically K-pop bands are pretty private about their private life. You know, they're pretty sort of keep things on the down low about their private lives and their existence and stuff. So this could be a really fascinating look at one of the biggest bands in the world. Plus the fact that obviously, like, K-pop bands work so hard. They are some of the hardest working people in show business, and this would be a really interesting reflection on, like, a group of people who are absolutely busting their asses to do good work. So yeah, obviously I think you already know if you want to go see this or not, but it will be a fascinating watch. I think even if you didn't know who BTS were, because while, yeah, clearly this is aimed at fans of BTS, there's plenty to dig into.
Absolutely. And speaking of music, you can now book your tickets for a film that I am so excited for. Bill and Ted Face the Music. Man, we'll talk about New Mutants and sort of like we'll talk about, you know, New Mutants and sort of the trouble production that's had to get to the cinema screen this week. But Bill and Ted Face the Music's not exactly a short story either. Like, that's, you know, a good 10 plus years that they've been working. Ed Sullivan's been working to get this, and Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter have been working to get this movie made. And yeah, it's finally here. It's already out in the States, but it's coming out here in the middle of September. I think September 16th is out here in the UK, but you can book your tickets for it now. I'm so excited for this movie. I love Excellent Adventure and I love Bogus Journey. I'm so excited to see Face the Music.
I think there's something to be said about that, like, that long development period as well. Like, that's something they play up in this film, right? Like, this is old Bill and Ted grown up with kids, and they go and meet different versions of themselves as well. This is really hamming up the idea that these are two old dudes now. And that'd be fun. I think, that's the only way to tackle it. You couldn't just transplant them back into being teens again. It just wouldn't work. And I think this looks like a really fun take, and also it comes at the peak of Keanu Reeves's powers.
Yeah, right.
We are in the Reeve era, so I'm excited to see him sort of do something quite different as well, because I think, like, he's definitely transitioned back into action hero Keanu Reeves after John Wick hit cinemas, and that really is, and Cyberpunk as well. That he's got a starring role in. Like, there's so much stuff that Keanu Reeves is doing that is really cool, and I think it's going to be funny to see him go back to being kind of goofy Keanu Reeves, because he's so good at that as well.
Yeah, it is quite weird to, like, watching the trailer to see him do the Bill voice, or the Ted voice rather, but he's got that John Wick, like, whisper about it as well. Because I'm John Wick, you killed my dog and I'm really mad at you. So then it was like, hey dude, yeah, let's go save the world, man.
He's so good. I love
He's great.
Keanu Reeves.
I know. We're actually recording this episode on his birthday as well. So happy birthday, Keanu. We
oh,
know
happy
you're watching.
birthday, Keanu. You are God to me.
So you can book tickets for that in the video description down below. I'm really excited to see it. They're such heartwarming characters. Like the one thing I've really loved about Bill and Ted, sort of like throughout my life, really, because the first film came out, when I was a nipper, and as did Bogus Journey, that they're so positive, and like the world's kind of falling apart at the moment. So like a nice bit of positivity would be sort of like very much needed. The basic message of just like be excellent to each other is something that like I think the world certainly could live by at this point in time.
Yeah, it's that little bit of awesome dude bro attitude that you just need right now. Yeah, I'm keen to see this.
Well, speaking of Trouble Productions, let's find out how New Mutants finally got to the silver screen. After initially being set for release in 2018, New Mutants was delayed, and delayed again, finally arriving on Cineworld screens this week in 2020. But why did the film take so long to get to our eyes? Let's find out in this brief history on the making of New Mutants. After completing The Fault in Our Stars in 2014, Josh Boone and Nate Lee pitched the idea of doing a trilogy of New Mutants movies to 20th Century Fox and longtime X-Men producer Simon Kinberg, who really liked it according to a 2016 interview with Boone, and Deadline Hollywood reported that it would tie into the events of X-Men Apocalypse, in particular the introduction of the Essex Corporation and Mr. Sinister. Early rumors had James McAvoy's Professor X and Alexandra Ship Storm featured in the film, along with the team lineup of Warpath, Sunspot, Mirage, Wolfsbane, Magic, Cannonball, and Magic's brother Colossus also rumored to feature. Demon Bear was set to be the film's main antagonist, which according to coming soon sources was set to be a Stephen King meets John Hughes horror movie. Simon Kinberg, however, told IGN that it would be a young adult movie. The film went into production in April 2017 for a release the following year on April 13th, 2018, with Boone casting Macy Williams as Wolfsbane, Anya Taylor-Joy as Magic, Henry Zaga as Sunspot, newcomer Blue Hunt as Mirage, Charlie Heaton as Cannonball, who beat out The Fault in Our Stars' Nat Wolff for the role, and Rosario Dawson as Cecilia Reyes before she left the movie and was replaced by Alice Braga. Boone told Entertainment Weekly that this would be a full-fledged horror movie with influences including Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors, but a report from Tracking Board noted that Boone was told to pull away from the horror aspects and make New Mutants a PG-13 young adult movie, and his script with Lee was being rewritten by upwards of 12 people in a writer's room tasked with tearing up the script and sticking it back together. Even with that, Boone still produced a movie that Fox were happy with and tested well with audiences, as well as Deadpool did. But following the successful release of It by Warner Brothers, Fox released a horror-inspired trailer for New Mutants that went over really well with audiences. But now the film Boone had shot was not scary enough to be a horror, and extensive reshoots were ordered for the film, including rumored additions of new characters, and a new release date was set of February 2019. One report even claimed that 50% of the movie was to be reshot in this time period, including the removal of Mr. Sinister as the villain, who would now be part of the Gambit movie, according to Simon Kinberg. The film was delayed again until August 2019, so it wouldn't be released around the same time as X-Men Dark Phoenix. The Disney acquisition of 20th Century Fox pushed the film back again to April 3rd, 2020. Oddly, however, the planned reshoots in 2018 never happened, according to a Hollywood Reporter article in March 2019 when writing about the Disney acquisition of 20th Century Fox. This was confirmed by Josh Boone himself when he completed the movie in March 2020, with the only major changes coming in the form of removing wider references to the pre-existing X-Men universe. Finally, the COVID-19 pandemic cancelled several film release dates, meaning New Mutants got its final release date push and is now out in cinemas. It's been a long and wild journey to get here, but the New Mutants are finally on the big screen, and you can book your tickets to see them at Cineworld Cinemas using the link in the video description down below.
But it's not just the New Mutants that's in cinemas this week. To celebrate the legacy of the recently passed Chadwick Boseman, Cineworld Cinemas are putting Black Panther back up on the big screen from this weekend where it belongs, so we can all shout Wakanda forever in unison and remember the great man.
It's finally here, Laurie Blake. New Mutants, the New Mutants, are finally here. This film was originally scheduled to come out in 2018. It was made in 2017. I mean, you've just heard all of this in sort of the preamble coming into this. But it's finally here. Was it worth the wait?
I think it's a really interesting X-Men film. I think it's like it does a lot of really clever things with some really interesting characters, and I think we've kind of done the big budget superhero X-Men film, you know, multiple times, multiple reboots of that sort of franchise. And I think where actually mutantdom on screen and where Marvel's characters really thrive is when they're taken out of the kind of mold of superheroics, like Logan, something like that, which you know, to all intents and purposes, is a Western.
Mm.
Like that's when actually powered up people really become interesting characters because they're trying to fit into a different paradigm that we already like. We already have a knowledge of like what a Western is. So seeing someone who can't die going through a Western and then spoilers, something happens. You know, like there's a lot of really interesting stuff in Logan, and I think New Mutants had a lot of those ideas going into it too. Like it was much more of a sort of teen drama. It felt much more like a bottle episode in the sense that like these are five kids all trapped in one very simple location. There's only 6-7 characters in the whole film. Really, like this is a really small, shrunk down version of an X-Men film, and really does feel like a sort of psychological thriller and a bit of a horror movie at the same time. It's got a lot of really cool ideas that it's trying to execute on, and I think it does them pretty well. Like I think that it plays up this idea in the kind of the way that Legion did. You know, the
Yeah.
idea of like, are there monsters? Am I losing my mind? What's causing this? Like New Mutants plays with all these ideas as Moonstar, Blue Hunt's character, Danielle Moonstar, moves into this facility run by Dr. Reyes and meets all the other who would become the New Mutants. And they sort of start have these visions and these dreams and these weird happenings going on in this thing as they all sort of try to navigate their relationships because they're all a bit messed up as people and they're all a bit cross that they're there and they're all a bit cross at each other and they start to form friendships. Like there's a lot in this. It felt very much like, it really reminded me of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in some ways, in the fact that it's kind of save the world drama wrapped up in kind of high school level
Teen
angst and angst. And yeah, exactly. I think I think there's a lot interesting in it, and I think it's really worth seeing. I really hope that, you know, this isn't just the end of this, like these characters and what they're going to do with them. I hope that Marvel thinks about a way of incorporating them, because I really do think there's something in this film that's really interesting and would add a string to Marvel's bow that they don't currently have. Like they don't have a sort of horror version of like any of their film franchises. Everything else is very like action focused and colorful and like larger than life. And I'd like to see something that's kind of personal and intimate and you know, like a Hawkeye film, for instance, would kind of do that. And I think New Mutants does that as well, because it was so much about coming of age and emotion, and you know, that's when mutants get their powers, when they sort of hit puberty. And I think there's so much to sort of play into there, because you see that, like, I think this is the opposite of say the X-Men franchise in general, because when you look at the X-Men franchise, like as the mutant kids come of age, they go and they are taken under the wing of Charles Xavier, and it's all very like, oh, he has a lovely Westchester mansion, and you know, and you get a nice yellow outfit, and you're an X-Man, and you're trained, and you're looked after, and you're schooled, and all this stuff, and all these kids are promised that, and it seems like that might not be what they're going to get. We'll obviously go more into that in the spoiler bit of this, so I don't want to spoil it now, but like their experience isn't quite living up to that kind of hype. They all know of a certain person who's even non-verbally mentioned, but yeah, it's I think it's interesting to see the other side of the coin for the kind of the mutants that aren't treated as well in their life.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because this is not a spoiler, but like Buffy is directly referenced in the show. Buffy is directly referenced in the movie as like you've got Macy Williams's character watching an episode of Buffy, and it always feels like Buffy is always in the background of this movie somewhat as a direct reference. And I mentioned a couple of weeks ago on this show the influences from Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, the Dream Warriors. It really has that feel about it of just like these kids who are being put into this sort of contained this contained area where they're told that they're there for a reason, but that reason might not be the actual reason that they're there. And it's played off quite nicely. And I think actually the changes that were made to the movie post the Fox Disney merger, which is the removal of a lot of the X-Men references. Like there are still some X-Men references within there, but all like the overt ones apparently have been taken out. And I think that actually helps the movie somewhat, because it feels like it's its own thing, as opposed to being, a smaller piece of a much larger picture. It's its own little self-contained story. And I think that actually helps the movie move along in the sort of 90 minutes. It doesn't feel like it's being bogged down by other things. And it kind of lets you get used to the characters and get used to this location they're in. Because like you say, it's a small cast. It's a small location as well. Like really, there's only like 5 scenes, like really that the film takes place in. So yeah, I did I got a lot of kicks out of it. And I would like to see more of the movie, like particularly because I thought Anya Taylor-Joy's Ilya Rasputin was really, really cool. Like I think the sort of the effects of that she had were pretty rad, really.
Yeah, I if I was going to say that if there's one like really winning aspect of this film, it is the character of Magic, as she becomes known later in the New Mutants timeline. She is Anya Taylor-Joy's portrayal of her is kind of twisted and tormented, but also kooky and playful and a bully, but also friendly. And there's so much going on with her that I think would be so interesting to delve into. And that's not even going into like where her powers actually came from and all that stuff, which I've been reading up about. And it's really like it's very X-Men. Well, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of different dimensions. So there's a lot of different dimensions, but like I think she's definitely the most complex character in the film as well, and by far and away the coolest character. Like if you were going to be like, you could build, like she feels like a character you could build a franchise around. She's so cool, and really has some like shining scenes in which like she's brilliantly funny throughout the film, but she's also an absolute warrior in some of the final scenes of the movie. And you're just like, yeah, I could see you being in a regular X-Men film and you wouldn't feel out of place. That she really is up there with like some of the better characters that we've seen on the screen from the Mutants.
Well, you can book your tickets to see New Mutants using the link in the video description down below. Go and see that film, because we're about to head into the spoiler territory now. So if you haven't seen the film, do stop this video, go and check out other videos here on the Cineworld channel, or go book your tickets, go see the film, then come back and join us for the spoiler-filled section. That is your spoiler warning. This is a very self-contained movie. There are no post-credit sequences. There's no mid-credits. There's no post-credit sequence. This very much feels like, Marvel at one point said that it was part of the MCU and then said that that was an error. I think Josh Boone has said in interviews that there probably isn't going to be any more of these movies. And the finale of it does feel quite finite, really, which is just they win, they beat the Demon Bear, they beat Reyes, which means that the shield goes down, and they could just leave and go off. And I suppose we as an audience are supposed to be like, well, I guess we'll never really know what world they go to find themselves in.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame, really. I think because I think they did some good work with some of these characters here. I don't think everyone gets quite the time to shine that you would wish. Like I don't think Charlie Heaton's character really, Cannonball really got a good shake of things. But I think like what's really charming about the film is that I think Blue Hunt's Danielle Moonstar, Maisie Williams, Rain. What's her surname? Rain Sinclair, and Anya Taylor-Joy's character really felt developed. Like Blue Hunt and Maisie Williams have this, like, it's a gay central relationship between two female characters. Like that's very progressive for a superhero movie. Like it's really charmingly told,
it's
and well
so lovely
done.
Yeah, it's really nice.
It feels natural. It feels like they kind of come together as definitely the two most sensible of the 5 characters in the New Mutants. You've got a sliding scale from Rain Sinclair all the way up to Magic on the other end, who is, a few marbles short. And so like she. I think, but she has such an interesting depth to her as well. Anya Taylor Joy's Ileana Rasputin. She's got this real pain inside her, and like, you know, the movie delves into a little bit of why all the kids are there, and it's all because they've been when their powers manifested, they've all been the cause of quite traumatic events, and a lot of people were hurt in the process, except for Magic, who
Mm.
took quite righteous vengeance on a bunch of people who kept her prisoner. And I really do think, like, you know, it would be a shame to just let all this work just go by the wayside, to just reboot it again and be like, oh, it's Cyclops and Storm and Wolverine again. You know,
Yeah.
that could be the worst thing that Marvel do, if it's just Iceman and Beast and Angel, and we just do the full, like, it's the original X-Men lineup again. It's like there's so many interesting X-Men characters who aren't those guys, and obviously those guys have baggage and trauma and stuff that's really interesting. You know, like Storm's are claustrophobic, and that, you know,
Hmm.
that adds a real layer to a character. Cyclops has watched everyone he loves die about 7 times because they keep coming back to life. Whatever it is, like, I think it's the X-Men, what they really need is kind of a fresh set of characters. And I think some of these guys could really easily transfer over. Like, and I'm going to keep banging on about it because I think she's so cool. But I do really think that I really do think that Ileana Rasputin, Anya Taylor Joy's character, could just walk into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and feel at home. She's got
Mm.
the quips, she's got the offbeat personality, she's got the kind of, in the midst of danger, is willing to throw out a few jokes. She's got Lockheed, who is the coolest thing I think that's ever happened. Like, the whole time spends the whole film talking to a puppet, and then it turns into a dragon at the end. And
Yeah.
because, you know, I've been reading the comics recently, all the whole X-Men reboot, and Lockheed belongs to Kitty Pryde, Shadowcat, at this point in time, and he's an actual dragon in the comic book. So I was watching it, being like, is she just going to talk to the toy one the whole time, or are we going to get
Yeah.
the dragon Lockheed? And then when he turned up at the end, I was like, oh yes, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. Yeah, I really do think that, because, you know, she's also got the power set too. She can go to a world called Limbo and
Mm.
travel between time and space. So she could just go and then she's here. And
Yeah.
I really do think she's the sort of character that could. I think it really was like it felt like a superheroic performance that's worthy of being in the MCU.
And the X-Men references were very much toned down for this. You kind of mentioned in the spoiler-free section that there is kind of like a visual reference to Charles Xavier, because they think that they're there to, yeah, exactly. Like, they think that they're there to, before they then go on to the mansion. But what they discover is that they're actually there as part of the Essex Corporation, and which had been teased in, I think it was X-Men Apocalypse. I think the post-credits of X-Men Apocalypse was like the reveal that the Essex Corporation was going to come in and they were going to get Mr. Sinister and things like that. So there kind of is that scope there to kind of, that's how you would introduce the mutants into the MCU if Marvel did decide to kind of tie this all together. But as I said, like in the spoiler-free section, I think that the lack of X-Men references, just that one dialogue scene that they had about it, and that, you know, the Essex Corporation stuff towards the end, actually really helped the movie not feel too bogged down in sort of like other world stuff. But it also, at the same time, kind of in the same way that Solo, the end of Solo, the Star Wars film, made me want to see more of this standalone movie, and it not to be a standalone movie anymore, and
Mm-hmm.
actually be fleshed out into, you can clearly see that Josh Boone did have plans to make this more than just a standalone movie.
Yeah, I think the kind of the succinctness and the encapsulation of this cast and this plot, and it all being in that one, you know, like that mansion's almost a pastiche of Charles Xavier's mansion, but
Yeah.
just on the sort of like the Bizarro world version. It's all inverted and it's all dark and gloomy, and, you know, there are so many parallels to X-Men here, but I think actually, like, not laying it on thick with the references makes it feel like, you know, it plays into the idea that these kids are quite alone here. Like, they are cut off from everything they kind of know of being, one, human kids, and then what they sort of basically know about mutantdom and being mutants. And yeah, I think the more you sort of were like, oh, well, Cyclops will come and save us, or oh, there's Wolverine walking past the window, people would just, you know, begs the question is like, why aren't they in the film more? Why isn't the film about them? You know, and I think like things like Deadpool did a really good job with this too, of like going, here's a character that you've not really featured on screen very much. So like, it's funny that Deadpool knocks on the door of the X-Men mansion in Deadpool and doesn't get answered by anyone important. He gets Colossus. Funnily enough,
Yeah.
Colossus is Magic's brother.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's kind of, it's nice when the films go like, we're going to hold back on the big stars, and obviously that's a budget thing more than anything else, but like holding back on the really big names and letting the smaller characters grow, because for every scene that you have Wolverine in, people are just going, we need more Wolverine in this film, rather than going like, I want to see Magic tear it up with a wicked sweet soul sword, and a wicked dragon that she's got. She's awesome. She's a really good character. More of that, please. You know, it will just be a shame that if that doesn't carry on, because this did some good work of setting that up. It really did bring these characters together. Like, I don't think it's a perfect origin story. It's definitely not up there with like, it's definitely not on the Guardians of the Galaxy level of like, here's a bunch of people you didn't know, and by the end of the film you really do know them. I think some of the characters are a little too generic for that. Like, I don't think Roberto is a
No.
wonderfully, like, is it Sunspot? I think he is.
Sunspot, yeah.
He's not a wonderfully interesting character, but he does become a very interesting character. Like, he's still one of the main New Mutants now. He narrates all the comic books that he's in. You know, he's a really fascinating character, but he wasn't really given enough screen time to grow here. But the ones they did focus in on, I think they landed really well. I think Maisie Williams' character, Rain Sinclair, is brilliant. I do really think that Magic is the best ever. And then I think Blue Hunt's character, like she was the emotional core of the film, and she was she was portrayed as more sensitive as the rest of them for a lot of the film, and like, you know, but she's also the most devastating in that sense, because her powers come from her emotions and come from her kind of like psychological trauma, and they manifest as this kind of fear monster. And whether that's her own fear, which is the demon bear, which is like, you know, that's said to be like her people are Native American, and that's one of the tales they tell of like, there are two bears warring over your soul. One is all the good and one is all the bad, and the demon bear is a manifestation of the bad. But she also brings about the manifestation of all of Magic's evil past, which is the weird smiling men that we saw in the trailer.
Yeah.
She brings Roberto into confrontation with like his kind of locked away bit of past. Same deal with Charlie Heaton's character. Like,
Yeah,
she really is. She's got that kind of. It's like Jean Grey before they locked away the bit of Jean Grey that was dangerous, which is what they've been saying in the X-Men films, right? Like, they, you know, Jean Grey was way more powerful, and Charles Xavier basically made her forget that she could do any of that. And Moonstar is that in raw form and needs to learn to control it. And part of this film is that, but I think she could be a really interesting addition to a wider Marvel universe.
Yeah, I think like you're right. Like, I don't think it's a perfect introduction movie, but I think sort of in like the wider X-Men movies, and bear in mind this could be sort of, you know, the last X-Men movie that we get. You know, certainly in sort of the Fox era of X-Men movies. I thought it was better than a lot of the other output. I think it's probably the best X-Men movie since Days of Future Past.
Yeah, and I mean, some of that is because they stripped away some of the goofier aspects of the X-Men films. I think because this was quite grounded, and there was no costumes, and there was no real villain. Like, the villain was the villain is emotion in this film, really, and a female woman scientist who has shields around. Like, she's just a cage, really, given the form, and the drama isn't, you know, how do we beat this woman? It's can we bring ourselves to do it? And that is a far more interesting quandary than like, how do we beat Invincible Man with our invincible, you know, we have to get a more powerful eye ray or whatever it is. Like, this brings up much more moral quandaries for the characters to overcome. And despite it being about teenage kids and angst and all that stuff, actually feels kind of more grown up in that sense.
But that's all we've got time for on this week's episode of What on Cineworld. Remember, get your reviews in of the films you've seen at Cineworld on Twitter using the hashtag What on Cineworld, and we can feature those in the outro portion of this show. I've been Luke Owen. This has been Laurie Blake. Please do click the links in the video description down below and get your tickets, and we'll see you next week.